So I think we're back, it seems. So, Mr. Azur, thank you for joining us. I was just saying before you came online that I had an urge to ask you questions around Lebanon, but I will avoid. And I will just jump to the subject of that matter today, which is this greater integration and creating this very much needed platform. So please, could you give us, from your point of view, the forecast and set the stage basically for this event?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Khalid. It's a great pleasure to be with you in this session, as well as also to share the views on both regions that are close to heart, but also that for me personally are the two regions that I cover at the fund. Both Middle East, Central Asia are the two areas that we have in my department at the International Monetary Fund. Let me, in fact, start by a bit setting the stage. Where do we stand today? And then look forward, what are the strategic directions on this issue? First of all, this region is going through a major transformation like other parts of the world, and this is because of the massive shock that the region had to face last year with the COVID-19 crisis. And in fact, it was a double whammy shock. It was the impact of the crisis itself, but also the volatility we saw in oil and commodity prices that are important for both regions. But let me start first with Caucasus and Central Asia. Therefore, countries had to react very quickly, and they have deployed both fiscal and monetary measures to address the first waves of the shock and also to start preparing the recovery. Of course, countries who have the capacity to deploy larger fiscal stimulus were able to have a lower level of impact in 2020 and faster recovery in 2021. However, what we can say today is the region is at crossroads. We are seeing the recovery this year compared to last year. Yet this recovery is uneven and highly uncertain. Highly uncertain because the fight between vaccine and virus is still going on, and the level of inoculation is relatively slow, except certain countries. It's also uncertain because the conditions on the oil market that are very favorable in the last few weeks may not last. And also, the global recovery should benefit the region, but there are also certain challenges, in particular the evolution of capital flows in the context of a change in monetary policy. Therefore, we are at a moment where we are exiting the crisis, preparing the recovery. However, I think where we need to focus our attention going forward is on three things. Over the last 5 years, growth was slow relatively compared to the past in Caucasus and Central Asia. Two, certain number of reforms were implemented and achieved results. And the proof is during the crisis, we saw the impact of that. Yet there is still unfinished business, especially in terms of reforming SOEs, as well as also cleaning the financial sector. Three is this stress test to the global value chain, to the trade, was also an important lesson to countries in Caucasus and Central Asia. The old model was to build corridors based on infrastructure. The next model will be, as the title of your session, is to create platforms. And those platforms are about connectivity, about capacity to create the right enablers, and also about the capacity to create a market. And this would require a strategy over the next 3 to 5 years. If countries will perform as they have performed, their recovery will be good, but will not be enough. In the next 5 years, they will remain 9% below the trajectory that existed before 2019. Therefore, they need to do more. They need to do more also in order to address inclusion issues, especially that also the crisis revealed the weaknesses in terms of high level of informality, dependence on tourism, as well as also dependence on remittances. The way to do this is, in fact, to move along three levers. One is macro stability or macroeconomic levers. The second is monetary lever, and the third one is structural. A recent study that we did showed that for those countries, you can improve growth on average by 1% if you address some issues that are preventing trade to grow. For example, trade openness, participation in the global value chains, diversification, improving the quality of their products. If you move along this reform agenda, countries can create an additional 1 to 1.5% growth on a yearly basis over the next 5 years. The second direction is connectivity. Clearly, there are opportunities between countries of Middle East and Central Asia, not only because they share a history in common, and not only because commodities are an important element, but also they are two adjacent or two regions that have many opportunities to build on. And the way to build forward is to understand how the global trends are moving. What is the next nexus of globalization? And how this next nexus of globalization would affect those countries. One, it's important to develop not only infrastructure, but value-add services. Develop a financial sector that could provide the additional financial inclusion that is always important in terms of integration. This is one. Second, believe in your internal market. And this is something that we see a growing agenda in the region. I give you an example. The opening of Uzbekistan 3 or 4 years ago provided an additional increase in trade for many countries in the region. Therefore, working on building a market that is more integrated, that looks at increasing by reducing the barriers, the space, and the capacity for international investors to operate is going to be an important dimension going forward. For that, government could, on one hand, improve the quality of their technology, infrastructure, financial infrastructure, reform their SOEs that have prevented many of those countries from growing fast. The third dimension that is also important in building platforms is relying more on the new source of funding. 1945, after the end of the Second World War, what helped in the recovery were international financial institutions and multilateral development banks. After the global financial crisis, central banks played an important role. After the COVID crisis, and especially for the region, there is a role for several sovereign wealth funds to play in igniting a recovery, in expanding the space for the private sector to lead the growth going forward, and in catching up in certain number of fast-growing sectors. Technology proved to be one of the silver linings for both regions, MENA and Central Asia and Caucasus. Technology is going to accelerate in terms of transformation, and countries of the region need to accelerate their investment on that. And here we see good examples. In the GCC, the 5G is a very good platform. In Central Asia, we saw the mobile technology has helped in providing greater access to services. Sovereign wealth funds also will allow to promote additional regional channels in terms of trade, in terms of joint infrastructure. Last but not the least, the role of international and regional organizations. IDB, Islamic Development Bank, World Bank, and ourselves and other institutions are very active. In our case, for example, last year, we provided the region, both Central Asia and MENA, about $17 billion of new financing. This is the largest financial support that those two regions got last year. And we intend to maintain our support through the SDR allocations this year that could be used also to be rechanneled to help other countries. But it's not only about providing the financial resources, it's also providing the convening power to create this dialogue. And thanks to you and to this session, promoting these kind of dialogues will be important. And we as institutions with others stand ready to promote this through additional analytical work, technical assistance, and also creating the environment for cross-country projects to take place. Going forward, new routes are going to be created, new channels are going to emerge, and new priorities too. Green economy is one of those. And countries in the region have already started to invest in this direction. I believe here that a new form of cooperation is going to emerge. In the past, it was very much top-down, state-driven. Now it's going to be more around initiatives and around a certain number of key players. Therefore, I think we are at crossroads today, and it's an important opportunity to look for the next 5 to 10 years and build a new strategy that will integrate in the diversification strategies of each country a dimension that has to deal with regional integration. Let me pause and happy to go into more details if you have any questions.
Okay. I just want to welcome His Excellency Romano Prodi, who just joined us and who is also a good friend of both regions. And so I will just jump to our next guest before going back to him, Mr. Kavis Sami. You are having a first look hand at how also the GCC countries are changing, how they also look at attracting investment. Could you please explain the processes that are happening there? And maybe this could serve as a case study or a way of moving forward to creating these cross-border or cross initiatives that Mr. Azur just mentioned.
Thank you, Khaled, for inviting me on this distinguished panel, and really enjoyed listening to His Excellency Muhtar and Mr. Azur. And I totally agree with them. There is such a similar synergies between this region, and I can clearly see that already developing in the GCC. I believe in the last few years, I think especially since the political events in the region has not really, like the past, spiked the oil prices. And as we know, most of these countries are very much reliant on basically one resource. Everyone has realized that they need to diversify their economies, and we can clearly see we have a young leadership in most of these countries, and very similar synergies between these countries that basically is demanding some action. And I'm glad to see that most of the leadership in this region has started to do so. So we are clearly seeing. I've been covering this region now for 35 years, and only really in the last, I would say, 5 years, I've started to see that some of the assets that no one would even think of are now starting to be available to investors. And I think that is the signs that the region is looking to diversify their economy as they need. I was involved in one of the first transactions where the Abu Dhabi government decided to sell their oil pipelines. ADNOC decided to sell their pipelines, which my previous company was involved in, and that was just it was one of the first and one of the few transactions that we've seen happen. And this I have now, since that transaction, I have spoken to several countries. I just came back from Saudi. Exactly the same is happening. The governments are realizing that these are the assets that the investors are looking at, that would be interested in, and these are the things that actually the way they have started to look at it is that they look at it as partnerships rather than they are selling assets, and which I think is the right way to look at it, because they're not selling their majority, but they are just benefiting from these assets to be able to use that to, first of all, gain know-how, knowledge transfer, as well as receive, be able to use the funds to diversify their economies. And that we will see, I think, as Mr. Azur said, I think over the next 5 to 10 years, I think we are going to see a major shift in this region on that, which is going to be very positive. And I think also there are a lot of dynamics that are similar in this region, that you have a very young population, as the other distinguished guests have already mentioned. We have a young population, a growing population, an educated population. I remember only a few days ago, I was at the Nazarbayev University in Astana, and I was very pleasantly surprised. I had brought one of our, at the time I was working at KKR, and I had brought Henry Kravis, the founder of KKR, to speak at the university. And the questions that we were getting from the students from the university were so sophisticated on private equity and the industry we were discussing over there. That was really, really pleasantly surprised to see. And I see the exact same thing across the GCC region. When you go now to the government entities in Abu Dhabi, in Saudi, in Qatar, and in UAE generally, you can clearly see the young generation that is coming back, educated. They are really sophisticated. They are looking to develop their countries into the next level by focusing on things the country needs. Technology, as everyone has already mentioned, being on top of that, but obviously several other things that I think the region can benefit from working together, like healthcare, like education, like infrastructure, things that are going to be key for this growth that they are expecting. So I think we are clearly seeing that, and I think you will see already in the next few years, some of the biggest assets that this region has will start to be available to investors, both locally and internationally. I think one thing is missing, and that's one of the things that that Jihad mentioned, which I think is key, is that with partnerships like the Islamic Bank, like the IMF and others, but there is one thing missing, is which I think is just a matter of time. We need the global investors to look at this region as, stop looking at this region just as a consumer or a provider of funds or capital into the funds. They have to look at this region as a great opportunity. I think this will be, together, Middle East and the CIS will be perhaps one of the only regions left that is untapped. As you mentioned, I'm glad you said that this is like a clean slate. It is like a clean slate. And I think that the investors around the world will start looking at this and need to look at this region as the greatest opportunity for the next 5 to 10 years. And that's when we start seeing them investing more time, capital, and also some of the brains. The people that built the private equity industry, the people who built the Berkshire Hathaways of this world, they're gonna have to come and start teaching and helping, partnering with different sovereign wealth funds in this region to get us to that level.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sami. I would like to now, building on what you just mentioned, there is this new generation, and this new generation looks at things differently, and it looks at green energy and sustainable energy and sustainability as a whole, as Mr. Azur mentioned. And so I would just jump to Mr. Salah Jaef. If you could tell us, how do you prioritize sustainable investment? How do you push it forward?
Thank you very much for your offer to speak today. It's a great honor. Speaking on Uzbekistan side, it's important to say that the government recognizes the importance of energy supply, and Uzbekistan is one of the landlocked countries which, to support its economic growth, requires a lot of energy inputs. And considering the shortage of some of the energy inputs in specific regions, the government is stressing highly the importance of renewable energies and fostering the green economy. Just recently, the government has awarded Abu Dhabi company 2 tenders they won to build one of the largest solar power stations in our country, power stations. So therefore, the renewable energy will increase its share in the total energy consumption in Uzbekistan. Also, before COVID-19 pandemic has broken out, Uzbekistan was very dependent on tourism, and tourism was one of the priorities in economic sectors of the government, along with some other industries. For example, the tourism arrivals just from 2017 to 2019 has increased by more than 3 times, from 2 million to nearly 7 million people per year. So this is a huge dramatic increase. And to support rural tourism, sustainable tourism, the government was using all of its tools to support a shift to green energy or sustainable renewable energy consumption in tourism-related rural areas. Also, the government has recently signed a contract with the local representatives of the World Bank to increase investments in infrastructure and in green energy infrastructure to support sustainable achievement of sustainable development goals. So as you can see from here, the government here, with the ongoing reforms and with the new strategies which being adopted, stresses the increase in energy efficiency, in shift toward green energy, and also in creating new stimulus and motivations for the businesses to increase or shift their power consumption from traditional sources towards to new green energy sources. And considering the strategic position of Uzbekistan in the Central Asian region, I think it's very important because the climate change and ongoing our advantage from the solar and wind power which we have. This is one of very important strategic moves because we adopted a Soviet infrastructure which was deteriorating over past 25, 30 years. And it's very important not to reinvest in this old infrastructure, but to start building new one, which is going to be more sustainable in the long run and support the increasing growth of population and demand for energy with the rise of income.
Thank you very much for this insight on what is happening in Uzbekistan, and especially this transformation and stop relying solely on fossil fuel and moving towards renewable energy. I'd like to jump to Mr. Askaroli. I believe the CAS Trade Center of Trade Policy is celebrating its 15th anniversary. Could you tell us more about how do you empower and support new opportunities for Kazakh goods, and how can we link up this platform with the Gulf and the MENA region in a broader way?
Thank you very much, dear distinguished guests, dear participants. It's my pleasure to meet you today at Astana International Financial Week. Very important event, and as for the trade in the region has grown multiple times, and it's now amounts to $85 billion US. And we see as the main partners Russia and China. But we see that our focus shifts into Central Asia, where the trade has grown to $5 billion US, and we see more opportunities to grow. And one of the as for the institute, it was created to join, to assist Kazakhstan in joining WTO 15 years ago, as you mentioned. But today, our main role is to enable exporters and help them to export to foreign markets. And of our new traditional market is Central Asia. And we pay a great attention to our partnership with Central Asian countries. And we see great opportunities in growing our trade. Can you shift to the next slide, number 3? Yeah, one of the new approaches that we're right now piloting and we want to implement is creating a system of trade hubs. As you know, one of the trade hubs will be at the border with Uzbekistan. It's called Central Asia International Center for Trade and Economic Cooperation. And there we will, through that center, we will try to increase the trade between the region. And Uzbekistan, of course, is one of the main trade partners, but we also have great trade links with other Central Asian countries. And one of the main roles is shifting not only trading with each other, also creating some common products, the product of Central Asia, and try to export our products to foreign markets. And we will create 5 trade hubs, each one with the border of foreign countries. For example, the Eurasian and Kızılca cross-border trade center with the border with Russia, Alata with the border with Kyrgyzstan, and of course traditional one is Horgoz, and for the trade with Central Asia. So due to the Nur-sultan program, infrastructure program, Kazakhstan invested a lot into transport infrastructure, and we has grown from several hundred containers of transit to 1 million TEU of transit we achieved the last year. And but we see it's not only transit market. As I mentioned, we see opportunity in creating common products and creating new specializing different goods. And in that sense, we have great plans, and we want to implement it by the next couple of years. Next slide, please. Due to the pandemic, of many countries paying a lot attention to food safety, and in Kazakhstan, we are net exporter of food products to the world. We have great sort of vegetables, wheat, and other agriculture commodity. What we want to do is to create some partnership with Central Asia. So to first of all, be self-sufficient in Central Asia in terms of food and food safety, and then grow to another products, not only the agriculture products, but to the more industrial products. Next slide, please. And all of these steps are aimed at integrating into the trade hubs across the world. We see great potential in growing our trade with Middle East and North Africa. We have 2 transport corridors linking them with the MENA countries with us. And only in May, we had organized a container train to Egypt and showed that everything possible, even though 2 seas that we have to pass, and also all the distance that we have to pass, it's possible, and we are creating the transport products to reach Middle East and North Africa countries. Overall, I want to conclude that we pay a lot of attention to our trade with Central Asian countries. We, as a leader in Central Asia, want to also enable other Central Asian countries to trade with the world. And we have infrastructure capacity, and we are building new ones. And hopefully also our partnership and trade with the countries in the region will grow, and with all will contribute to the economic growth, not only Kazakhstan, but also all Central Asian countries, and all our nations will benefit from it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I don't know if His Excellency Romano Prodi is still with us. I just wanted to move on and see with him the geopolitical balance, and as well as really a broader look to it, but I'm not sure if he's still with us. So let's move. I'll move to Mr. Hugendum. Please, you have with the Qatar Financial Center focus on creating links between different hubs and different financial hubs and different financial regions. How would you see this applying and moving forward with the Central Asia region and Kazakhstan?
Yeah. Hi. Thank you, Khaled, and thank you for allowing me to represent Qatar on this important panel. As an example of a GCC country, I think Qatar really found this trade corridors extremely important. You've seen our Deputy Prime Minister visiting Kazakhstan last month, and our Emir, as announced, will visit Kazakhstan in the fall. So you see Qatar as an example, and I'm pretty sure that the other GCC countries do something similar, to develop these corridors and also put money where the mouth is. So in other words, there will be investments to develop these trade corridors. And it's not only about importing products or exporting products. It's much more than that. So the title of the panel is basically from corridors to platforms. And as an ex-banker, I strongly believe that yes, of course, you need to make sure that your transport routes will work and that the quality is good and the products are good. But also the finance part is extremely important. And what we throughout history have seen is that trade finance is a relatively good asset class. And now we see the major institutional investors in the world discovering that asset class needs to be tapped into. But that is very difficult. So I strongly see an opportunity for platforms, as you in your introduction mentioned, and typically sort of matchmaking platforms. And I can see a link, let's say, between Qatar and Eurasia and opportunities to tap into I would say, into the banking sector of Qatar and the GCC in general, to make sure that those trade financing things can happen. So that is one thing. And the second thing is then ultimately to sort of securitize those trade finance transactions into investors, because I think it's a great opportunity. And normally these are short-term, 180 days trades. And we've seen during COVID that specifically that category of short-term trades were affected. Nobody was prepared to give as SME exporters the opportunity to do their trades. So if we together with the banking sector in GCC, and Qatar is prepared, develop these market matchmaking platforms, we can ensure trade finance between the corridors in Central Asia, but also Central Asia and GCC. Then I think innovation like blockchain technology, etc., will make the export and import much safer because the quality of the products, etc., etc. So I'm pretty sure that in the next, well, I wouldn't even say 5 years, in the next 3 years, we will have these platforms. We will have that technology available and will make life easier. Of course, we will have geopolitical issues from time to time, but trade will continue. And with the support of GCC, I think we can develop the corridor with Eurasia, Central Asia, much better than it was before.
Thank you very much. I'd like to go back to Mr. Azur, because we're seeing, and this panel has showed it very well, a greater involvement from, let's say, institutional investor, sovereign investors. And so I would like to ask you, does this make it more difficult for private sector to thrive and to do this investment? Because if you look at, let's say, let's take a comparison with Europe, you have a lot of private equity, venture capital, private firm that go to their LPs with different investment theses and really helped build what we have today as a single market in Europe. When you only have institutional or sovereign investors, isn't there a risk of this building being short-lived? And so how do you engage with the private sector, especially what Hank just said, within the investment and as well as lending and the financial scope of building and moving towards a true platform?
Khalid, you are raising a very important question here. Let me say a few points on a subject that is very wide. First of all, if you look back over the last 10 years, you see that the capital flow after the global financial crisis recovered faster in terms of portfolio investment and much less in terms of FDIs. While in other emerging economies, we saw also a recovery in FDIs. In our region, It was mainly capital flow in terms of portfolio flows that have accelerated over the last 5 years, thanks to the deepening of local financial markets, as well as also the push factor coming from the monetary policy easing globally. The second development we saw is that the investment tends to be very cyclical with the oil and commodity prices. 3 is the public sector is still dominant, especially the SOEs. 4, financial inclusion matters. Those are important issues, and therefore going forward, it's very important to deepen the financial markets, diversify the markets beyond the banking system. Banks are well capitalized, liquid, but I think we need to broaden the offering of financial services and type of financing. We need also to accelerate the transformation of the SOEs. We're seeing this phenomena happening in different countries. We see this in Saudi, for example, where the privatization or PPPs. We see this in Kazakhstan. We see this also in Uzbekistan that has launched over the last 2-3 years a major program of public-private partnership. But also, we need 2 other important elements. One is macroeconomic stability. And why I'm saying that? This crisis showed us that the nexus between banks and the sovereign has increased over the last 12 months, i.e. the major financing of the public debt came from the financial sector. And here there is a risk of crowding out the private sector. Therefore, it's very important here to have a medium-term macro stability strategy that allows all these countries to be less pro-cyclical, especially for the oil exporting ones, and also provide a greater space for the private sector. 2, scale matter. And several speakers on the panel highlighted the importance of creating coalitions around a certain number of initiatives and activities. 3, a forward-looking approach also is very important. I think here I will echo what has been said. Knowledge, education, technology, and the last year were the silver linings of what we learned from this crisis. Therefore, to build programs of research, you need more than one country. To build even big investments, you need more than one country. Take Airbus, for example, in Europe. It is a project that is involving more than one country. Last but not the least, it's very important to understand what is happening around. Take Europe. Europe, on one hand, is investing 700 billion euro that could benefit some of the countries in the region, for example, the Caucasus and Central Asian countries, but also some of the countries in the Middle East. But on the other hand, their climate strategy is going to set the bar very high, which will have an impact on export if countries don't adjust and adjust fast. My last point here is, in order to create a market, you need to have a market participants. And therefore, it's very important that actors from both regions will meet regularly together, discuss opportunities, but also discuss adjustment in policies that they can put in place in order to allow investment to flow easily and in order to create scale. Don't forget that the whole global economy is building a new normal, a kind of 2.0 type of globalization. And therefore, to exist, you need also to get a better understanding of your comparative advantages, and also to link to some of the global trends that are taking place.
I mean, it's very interesting because, as you mentioned, you need to bring these regions together and to communicate more together. So I have a question for all your distinguished speakers. Do you think that more forums is a good way to anchor this new trend, that bringing both these regions together? Mr. Askaruli, what do you think? Do you think that forums can help bring these two regions together in a better way?
Yeah, I think yes, we need to share the knowledge with each other, and the forum is a great way to do that. And all of the projects that we have now, partnering with the OECD and ITC, WTO, are all aimed at creating new opportunities for Central Asia. We are the actors. Our institute is a part of the Ready for Trade Ready for Trade program of ITC, and also we have the same program with OECD. And all they stress not only hard infrastructure and reducing barrier, also sharing the knowledge. So we need to share the knowledge, and the way to do is to create more programs, to meet with each other, to create new forums, and also make our exporters, our companies participate. So, and to grow the regional trade in Central Asia.
Mr. Sami, do you think that there is a case within international and regional investors for a trans-regional fund? Is this something that can exist, and how do you communicate better to reach that point?
That's a very good point, actually, and I absolutely agree. I think there is a big case to be made, and a forum like that can help. I think several of the countries in the region, including between MENA and CIS, many may not even know some of the closeness and similarities. At the same time, similar challenges and similar opportunities that by working together can actually create a very powerful region. Let's not forget this. If you draw a line from north to south, this is really a bridge between the European countries and Asian countries in a way. And where it's geographically is located, and as I mentioned before, the similarities between these countries, the young population, educated population, the same needs for creating jobs, the same needs to developing technology, education, and various other things that we have already mentioned. This is a key. And by working together, each of these countries right now, I think they're starting to realize, but each country seems to try to do the same and learn from the successes of each other. And you can clearly see very similar things being developed within these countries, some of them even within the same country. As I'm sitting right now in Dubai, you can see that a lot of things that Dubai did and succeeded in, right now you're seeing Abu Dhabi doing similar things, and you've seen it in the region at the same time even further, which would make sense for them to work together and help each other from their mistakes and their experiences and their successes. But by working together, and let's not forget, many of these countries have relatively lower populations, but by getting together, they can be a meaningful group of people that can be very influential generally in the world economy. This was a long answer to your question, but I think a fund would make a lot of sense. But as I said before, what we need to create, and to pick up from what Jihad said before, I think we need to create a financial system here that the rest of the world will look at and like and trust. We need them to start investing in it. We don't want this fund to be created just for the regional sovereign fund funds to invest in it. I think actually the bigger opportunity is for this one to be created. Yes, maybe it needs to start with seeded by the regional sovereign wealth funds, by IMF, by the Islamic Bank. But I think what we need to create is such an attractive, which I do believe that for the next 5 to 10 years, this region will be so attractive that the rest of the world should look at it and start thinking of investing in it.
We've run out of time. I'll leave it to that with this optimistic note from both Mr. Sami and Mr. Azur. I thank you all for taking part in this panel, and hopefully we can continue this conversation, because as everybody mentioned, it is about getting to know each other. It is about continuing the conversation, and this is how we find solutions and we build this trans-regional platform all together. Thank you very much. and I will now close the session.
Thank you.
Thank you.